Here's how I get my old house ready for the colder months as we head into autumn. So if you live in a period property or just an old house in general, you will know that they are notoriously cold. Particularly in homes that were built in the 1920s or before, they tend to have high ceilings and big windows, and so they don't retain heat as well as properties built after them. So the first thing we do when we feel that chill in the air is we break out all of our best throws and duvet covers. Another thing to note with older properties or period homes is that they can be quite expensive to heat. And so if you can keep warm a more cost-effective way by throwing a big blanket over you or having a nice quilt on your bed, then I would recommend it. Both these patchwork quilts are genuine 1940s quilts and were made during the Second World War. And what's great is that they were constructed entirely out of disused clothes like shirts, skirts, jumpers, etc. And if they can keep Edith warm in the Anderson shelter during the blackouts, then I think they can work just as well for me. And if you're like me and you like to browse on your phone or do a spot of reading before bed, then I would recommend a third, smaller blanket to put over your shoulders when you're sat up at night. Now, this isn't so much house prep as it is person prep, but one of the things that you must do in a cold house is make sure you've always got lots of comfy jumpers and cardigans to hand. And so, like everybody around the country right now, I'm swapping out my summer clothes for winter clothes. And although we all love those snuggly winter outfits, it can be quite hard to fit such chunky knits into my relatively small wardrobe. You see, I tried to live by a capsule clothing plan, and what inspired me to do this was learning about the 1940s, and if you'd like to learn more on that, then I do have a video explaining it. Now, this next one might seem a bit contradictory, but the next thing we do is open all the windows in our home of a morning. We do this to let some fresh air back into our home and also to combat that old homeowner's worst nightmare, condensation. For those of you wondering who I'm waving at my pigeons because I can see them from where I'm standing in their Avery, but don't worry, we'll see them later. Letting in fresh air will also help if you have any original windows still in situ, like this sash one, which is the only original window left in our entire home. Obviously, we never leave the windows open whilst we've got the heating on or a fire going. We usually do this the morning after. And speaking of fires, I'd like to introduce you to my original 1920s cast iron fireplace. Now, if I'd have wanted to, I could have had the chimney swept and had this working as an authentic fireplace again. But as we already installed a log burner downstairs and this fireplace is much smaller, I wanted something that was a bit easier but would still give the same effect. And so for the next steps in our cold weather prep, I give the fireplace a general clean, but I mainly clean out the ethanol burner. It really doesn't get that messy, but it does help to keep it clean as it will help it burn better. And after cleaning, I always get a fire going and decide what arrangement I'd like my logs to be in this time. Honestly, I was a bit sceptical about ethanol fires because it didn't feel quite as authentic. But I have to say, they are a clean, environmentally friendly way of getting that same warming effect, and it also is a real fire, so it actually does warm your room as well, I should stress that. Next up, this is kind of a given and is the staple in most homes, British ones anyway, I'm not sure about elsewhere, but you need a really good warm dressing gown. So grab yourself a nice fleece or woolen dressing gown and you'll be warm wherever you are in the house. Now this next one is a big one in our house, and this is why we have so many of them, and that is hot water bottles. A simple, cost-effective way, and the heat does last for quite a while, and so you can keep it close to you whilst you go about your business. It's also a great option because you can give it to any guests that you might have staying over so that they can keep warm too. The next tip is an absolute lifesaver for us, and that is our dehumidifier. And this is the best thing to combat condensation. Ours pretty much lives in our bathroom, and it is amazing to see just how much water it collects in only a day. The downside is it's pretty cumbersome to move around, although ours is on wheels, and also you need a plug for it to be able to work. And as a home that very much does not reinvent the wheel, the next tip is a good pair of house slippers. If you're like me, then your extremities are always ice cold, and that means fingers and toes. So get yourself a good pair of house slippers that you can slip on the moment you arrive home. Now, although I'm someone who very much loves summer, and I actually do get SAD, and that's SAD, seasonal affective disorder, there are some things about the colder months that I actually really love. One of which is snuggling up by a roaring fire and reading one of my favourite books or watching one of my favourite shows. And so next up in our prep is stocking up on logs. We have a log store in our back garden which we replenish every once in a while. And that means we always have a heating source to hand, which doesn't involve flicking on our heating because, let's face it, we're all going through a cost of living crisis. And what I've already done by this point is give our log burner a really good clean out. So as you can see, we're ash and cinder free. And yes, you already know that I have a set of vintage fireside tools that can help me with that. I also recently read somewhere that lighting your fire from the top can help it burn better, but I've always been somebody that lights the fire from the bottom, so we'll see how this goes. Now here's a really special one in our home in particular, and that's the use of our plate warmer. Plate warmers don't really exist anymore, but the general concept is that your plates could warm up whilst you were cooking so that when you served dinner on them, they were already nice and toasty. And in those cold months, serving your dinner on a warm plate really does make all the difference. Now here's something that's again very unique to our home and isn't necessarily an old home hack, but is still something that I wanted to share. And that's getting my Avery ready for the cold. But first of all, you know that I've got to call the children home. Good babies. One more to go. But there's always one left. Boy. You're a good boy. And after doing a quick head count, we can finally begin. Now, this Avery is already insulated, but in the colder months, I like to roll down a big waterproof sheet to protect the birds from the wind and the rain. It just adds a little bit of extra protection, and once it's down, I clip it into place and we're good to go. Next up, for all you antique lovers, you may have some of your very own cast iron garden furniture. What we like to do is when the weather starts to get a little worse is cover it up until the summertime when it's nice and dry. And arguably the most important thing to do when you live in an old house and those cold months are on the way is pick out your favourite book and your favourite spot and just shut out the rest of the world for a moment.